There are things we do not speak of, not because we've made peace with them, but because we fear we never will. Words we swallowed, feelings we buried beneath years, memories we stored away, hoping time would dissolve them. But time doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it just hardens the silence. And silence, left too long, becomes a prison. A quiet, polite kind of suffering. She came to this forest not to forgive someone else. She came to forgive herself for holding on too long, for confusing strength with suppression, for pretending the pain didn't shape her. There's a part of healing that feels like walking backward. You think but in truth, you're returning to the place you avoided, to the memory you blurred, to the version of you that never got to finish her sentence. This is not a place of punishment. It's a place of remembering, a place of choosing to keep carrying or to set it down. They call it the forest of flame, but no forest here burns. Only what is ready to be released. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it's not the same as accepting what should never have happened. It's choosing to stop bleeding for a wound that's no longer open. She had read all the quotes, all the advice, but none of it prepared her for the ache that forgiveness would require. Because to truly forgive, you must first let yourself feel it. What no one tells you is, the person you're most afraid to forgive is often the version of you that let it happen. The version who didn't leave, who stayed too long, who kept the peace at the cost of your own. But she didn't come here to shame that version of herself. She came here to sit beside her, to hold her hand, to say, you did the best you could, and I won't abandon you now. To be wronged is nothing, unless you remember it. But what if the memory doesn't ask to be erased? What if it just wants to be witnessed, with softness instead of scorn? And so she made a promise. I will not carry what isn't mine. I will not build my home in the house of pain. She came not to destroy, but to release. To stop measuring her worth by how much pain she could hold. To stop writing the same story over and over again with different characters. There are fires that burn everything to ash, and there are fires that illuminate the truth. She came to start the second kind. The kind that doesn't leave you empty, but finally, free. The letter she never sent. She had written it years ago, in a moment of shaking hands and unshed tears. The words poured out, unfiltered. Not to be mailed, just to be spoken. Just to be known. But she never sent it. Because she was afraid. Afraid of reopening what had already shattered. Afraid of seeming weak. Afraid that the truth would be met with silence. So the letter stayed hidden, folded inside a drawer, a wound wrapped in paper. You hurt me, and I let you. I wanted to believe it wasn't as bad as it felt. I kept forgiving without being asked. I kept explaining your behavior to everyone, even to myself. But I was the one bleeding, quietly. I thought if I understood you, I wouldn't have to feel what you did. But I still felt it. I feel it now. The Stoics taught that pain itself is not the problem. It is the judgment of pain that chains us. But what do we do? When the pain was never given permission to speak, she had silenced herself to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace. It's performance. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice. Not once, but over and over. Every time the memory returns, every time the anger stirs, she didn't forgive because they deserved it. She forgave because she did, because her freedom mattered more than their apology. She thought this would feel like letting go, but it didn't. It felt like returning to herself, to her truth, to the woman she had left behind, the one who finally spoke, the fire that freed her. Forgiveness didn't explode into her life like thunder. It crept in like a tide, gentle, silent, certain. She expected to feel relief, a release of pressure, like exhaling after holding her breath too long. But what came was quieter than that. Not an absence of pain, but a presence of peace. The pain wasn't gone. It was just no longer in control. The Stoics spoke of freedom, not as the absence of difficulty, but as the power to remain unshaken by it. She used to think forgiveness meant excusing the inexcusable. Now she knew. Forgiveness is the refusal to let the wound speak for you. Every step she took was a reclaiming of breath, of self-worth, of voice. This wasn't about letting go of the past. It was about letting go of who she had to become to survive it. She grieved the parts of herself she abandoned, the silence she mistook for grace, the anger she turned inward, the love she gave without return. And in that grief, she bloomed, not in spite of it, but because of it. She began to remember the versions of herself that existed before the wound, before the closing, before the shame. And in remembering them, she felt joy. A quiet, private joy that needed no explanation. Not every apology will come. Not every ending will make sense. Not every hurt will be undone. But still, you can forgive. Still, you can choose peace. Still, you can begin again. The past was still real, but it no longer needed to be carried. The story would remain. But now, she was the one holding the pen. This was not the end of pain. It was the end of its authority. This was not forgetting. It was forgiving, from the inside out. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. The fire that freed her forgiveness is when the past loses its power to define your future. The walk back in light. Some endings are not loud. They don't come with applause, or final words, or a clean break. Some endings arrive like light. Soft, patient, total. She came here to burn a letter. But what she really released was the story she had lived inside for far too long. She used to walk through life scanning for danger, holding her breath, waiting for the next loss, the next betrayal. Now, she walks with her feet on the earth, not floating above herself, not bracing, just walking. The Stoics taught, he is a wise man who does not grieve for what he has not, but rejoices for what he has. She did not have the apology. She did not have the clarity. But she had herself. And that was more than enough. Gratitude was no longer something she performed. It was something she became. The peace she carried was not perfect. It trembled. It wavered. But it was hers. And it did not depend on anyone else. She once thought freedom would feel like escape. But real freedom felt like belonging. Not to someone. Not to a role. But to the moment. She was no longer at war with herself. No longer haunted by what could have been. No longer negotiating her worth. She had chosen forgiveness, and in doing so, had chosen herself. Not the wounded self, not the guarded self, but the whole self. She did not leave the forest healed. She left honest, and that honesty became her wholeness. The walk back and light you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become next. The forest remembers. The forest does not ask you to stay. It does not demand your transformation. It only offers a place for truth, if you are brave enough to sit with it. She came here broken, tired, full of stories that did not belong to her. And now, she leaves with fewer answers, but far less weight. This place did not give her clarity. It gave her permission. Permission to be soft, to be angry, to be whole. The Stoics spoke often of discipline, of temperance, of self-mastery. But what they also knew, and rarely said, was that the most powerful form of discipline is tenderness toward the parts of ourselves we were taught to silence. To forgive is not to forget. It is to remember differently, to change the meaning of the pain without erasing the truth. There was no applause, no dramatic final lesson. Only breath, only ground, only knowing. The forest remembers her, not as a visitor, but as someone who let go here, who bled here, who breathed here, and who finally forgave not just others, but herself. She does not need to be healed. She needs to be honored. And from this moment on, every step she takes will not be for survival, but for celebration of the woman she became. Because she chose fire, and then chose to walk away from it. Let this be a story not of how she burned, but of how she rose, of how she softened without breaking, and how she finally, beautifully, forgave. The forest remembers shit you release in silence will bloom in everything you touch. The fire that forgives, amor fati, begin again.